Eleanor Bennett set her trunk down on the edge of the Missouri platform and looked east, toward the life she had already buried. 3 days. She had waited 3 days. No letter, no telegram, no man in a brown hat. Just the whispers of strangers and the slow death of every promise she had carried west in her chest pocket. On the 4th morning, she picked up that trunk and aimed herself toward the ticket window. She was done. And that is when the dust rose on the horizon. If you want to hear what happened next, subscribe to this channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story has traveled. The ticket agent didn't look up. He didn't have to. He'd watched her sit on that bench for 3 straight days, and he'd already made up his mind about what kind of woman she was. "One way back to Philadelphia," Eleanor said. Her voice didn't shake. She wouldn't allow it. The agent flipped a page in his logbook. "That'll be $11, miss." Eleanor opened her coin purse. Her fingers found $6.40. She counted it twice, then a third time, because counting gave her hands something to do besides tremble. "I don't have enough," she said quietly. The agent looked up now. His eyes swept over her. The traveling dress that had been clean on Monday, the bonnet that had wilted in the heat, the trunk sitting beside her like a headstone. "You that mail-order woman?" he asked. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I'm a school teacher from Philadelphia." "Uh-huh," he leaned back. "The one whose husband didn't show." She didn't answer. She didn't owe him an answer. But the silence hung between them like a verdict, and every person on that platform heard it. A woman near the water pump nudged her husband. 2 boys sitting on flour sacks stopped kicking their legs and stared. The old man selling roasted peanuts shook his head slow, the way men do when they believe a woman has done something foolish and want the world to see they saw it coming. Eleanor picked up her trunk. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she could not stand still 1 more minute on this platform, where everyone had already written the end of her story. She walked toward the road. The heat was ungodly. Missouri in late July had no mercy. The air sat heavy on her skin, and the dust kicked up with every step and clung to the hem of her dress like it wanted to keep her here. She made it 40 yards past the station before her arms gave out. The trunk hit the dirt. She stood over it, breathing hard, and pressed her hand against her ribs where something sharp and broken had been sitting for 3 days. She was not going to cry. She had made herself that promise on the 2nd night, when she'd slept sitting up on that bench because the boarding house wanted $2 she didn't have. And a man had walked past her and said, loud enough for everyone, "That's what happens when a woman gambles on a stranger." She was not going to cry. Not here. Not in front of this town that had already decided she was a cautionary tale. Eleanor bent down and opened the trunk. She pulled out a folded letter, the last one he'd sent. Nathaniel Cole, 36 years old, rancher in Wyoming Territory, veteran of the war. A man of few words who had written more words to her in 6 months than most men speak in a year. She read the last line again. "I will be there, Eleanor. You have my word." She folded it. She put it back. She closed the trunk. Then she sat on it, because that was all she had left. A trunk full of letters from a man who did not come, and a body too tired to carry it any further. That was when Mrs. Adelaide Mercer found her. Adelaide was a woman built like a fence post, narrow, upright, and impossible to push over. She ran the only boarding house in town, and she had buried 2 husbands and 1 son, and still woke up every morning before the sun, because grief, she said, was no excuse for laziness. She stood over Eleanor with a tin cup of water and a look that could have been pity, or could have been recognition. "You the Bennett woman?" Adelaide asked. Eleanor took the water. "Yes, ma'am." "Your man ain't come." "No, ma'am." Adelaide looked down the road, then back. You got people to wire? No. Money for a room? No. Skills? Eleanor looked up. I can teach. I can read. I can do figures. I can write a letter that makes a man believe I'm worth riding 400 miles for. She paused. Apparently, that last one doesn't hold. Adelaide didn't laugh, but something shifted in her face. A softening, maybe. Or just the recognition of a woman who had once been exactly this desperate and survived it. I got a room, Adelaide said. You can work it off. Breakfast starts at 5. You wash, you cook, you keep your mouth shut about your business, and I'll keep mine shut about mine. Eleanor stood up. I'll take it. There's one condition. Name it. Adelaide pointed a bony finger at the trunk. You stop sitting on that thing like you're waiting for a funeral. Whatever he did or didn't do, you're alive. Act like it. Eleanor picked up the trunk. It was still heavy, but something about carrying it behind Adelaide Mercer made it weigh a little less. She worked. Lord, she worked. 5 in the morning, Eleanor was hauling water. By 6, she had biscuits in the oven and coffee on the stove. By 7, she was scrubbing floors on her hands and knees, while boarders stepped over her like she was part of the furniture. She didn't complain. Adelaide watched her the way a hawk watches a rabbit. Not to kill it, but to see if it knows how to survive. On the second day of work, a man named Guthrie, a cattle broker with tobacco-stained teeth and a voice like gravel, sat down at breakfast and looked Eleanor up and down. You that bride nobody came for? He asked. Eleanor set his plate down. You that man nobody asked? The table went quiet. Guthrie's face reddened. He opened his mouth, but Adelaide appeared behind him like she'd been conjured from the floorboards. Mr. Guthrie, Adelaide said, you've got eggs and you've got coffee. You don't got permission to interrogate my help. Eat or leave. Guthrie ate. After breakfast, Adelaide found Eleanor in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. You handled that fine, Adelaide said. I wanted to pour the coffee on his head. I know. That's why I said you handled it fine. Adelaide took the dish rag from her. Listen to me, girl. This town's gonna talk. They're gonna call you foolish. They're gonna call you desperate. Some of them are gonna call you worse. You let it roll off you like rain off a tin roof. You hear me? Yes, ma'am. Good. Now go beat those rugs. I can smell last winter in 'em. On the 5th day, 5 days since she'd arrived, 2 days since she'd started working for Adelaide, Eleanor was hanging laundry on the line behind the boarding house when she heard it. Hoofbeats. She didn't turn around. She'd heard hoofbeats before. Every time a rider came through, her heart had clenched like a fist, and every time it had been nobody. A freight hauler, a drifter, a boy on a mule. She pinned a bedsheet to the line and kept her back to the road. The hoofbeats stopped. Ma'am? The voice was low, rough-edged, like a man who hadn't spoken much in a long time and had forgotten how to start. Eleanor pinned another sheet. Ma'am, I'm looking for... The voice broke. Just barely. Just enough. I'm looking for Eleanor Bennett. She stopped. Her hands stayed on the clothesline. Her knuckles went white again. She could feel her pulse in her teeth. She turned around. He was standing at the edge of the yard with his hat in his hands. Tall, broad across the shoulders, but thin in the way men get when they forget to eat. His face was weathered, not old, but worn, like leather that's been left in the sun. His left hand had a tremor he was trying to hide by gripping the brim of his hat. And in his right hand, a yellow rose, wilted, half dead, held out like an offering he already knew wasn't enough. I'm Nathaniel Cole, he said. and I'm 5 days late." Eleanor looked at the rose. She looked at his hands. She looked at his face, at the eyes that couldn't quite hold hers, that kept dropping to the ground like a dog that knows it's done wrong. She didn't melt. She didn't run to him. She didn't cry. She said, "I know who you are, Mr. Cole." He flinched. Not at the words, at the way she said, "Mr. Cole." Like he was a stranger. Like those 6 months of letters had been written by someone else. "Eleanor, Miss Bennett." He swallowed. "Miss Bennett, I can explain." "Can you?" She pulled the last pin from her apron and set it in the basket. Her movements were steady. Her voice was level. Everything inside her was screaming, but she had learned in 5 days on this platform and in this boarding house that screaming was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Can you explain why I sat on a bench for 3 days while this entire town decided I was a fool? Can you explain why I slept in a train station because I had no money and no place and no husband? Can you explain why the only person in this town who showed me an ounce of kindness was a widow I'd never met?" Nate opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "I wrote you 14 letters, Mr. Cole. You wrote me 17. In the last one you said, and I can recite this because I read it so many times I wore the paper thin. You said, 'I will be there, Eleanor. You have my word.' I know what I said." "Then what happened to your word?" He stood there. The rose trembled in his hand. The tremor was worse now, not just his hand, but something deeper, something that ran through him like a crack in dry ground. "There was a flood," he said. "Hart's Creek broke its banks, took out the bridge and half my fence line, lost 9 head of cattle. I couldn't get to the road for 2 days." "That's 2 days," Eleanor said. "You're 5 days late." Nate looked at the ground. The muscles in his jaw worked like he was chewing on something that wouldn't go down. "The other 3 days," he said quietly, "were cowardice." The word sat between them. Eleanor waited. "I got to the road," Nate continued, still looking down. "And I stopped. I sat on my horse and I looked east, and I thought, what kind of man am I bringing her to? A busted fence, a flooded creek, a house that smells like mildew and loneliness. A man who wakes up screaming 3 nights out of 5 because the war won't stay where I buried it." He looked up. His eyes were red. "I thought you deserved better. I thought if I didn't come, you'd go home and find a man who could give you a real life." "You thought," Eleanor said slowly, "that you would decide for me." "Yes." "Without asking me?" "Yes." "You thought that a woman who sold everything she owned, traveled 1,100 miles alone, and sat on a train platform for 3 days in July heat. You thought that woman couldn't decide for herself what she deserved?" Nate didn't answer, but something in his face cracked. Not the way a man breaks, but the way a wall breaks. The kind of crack that lets light through. "I was wrong," he said. "You were." "I'm sorry." "I know you are." Eleanor looked at the rose in his hand. Wilted, brown at the edges, barely holding together. "Mr. Cole, I didn't come here for roses. I didn't come here for romance. I came here because your letters made me believe there was a man in Wyoming Territory who wanted a partner, not a decoration. Was I wrong about that too?" "No," he said. "No, ma'am. You were not wrong." "Then here's what's going to happen." She stepped forward, 1 step, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her face and the steel behind it. I have conditions. You don't get to decide them. You get to hear them, and you get to say yes or no. All right. Separate rooms until I say otherwise. All right. Full honesty about everything. The ranch, the money, the war, the nightmares, all of it. You lie to me once, I walk. I don't care if I have to walk all the way back to Philadelphia. I understand. Equal say in the ranch, in the house, in what we eat, in how we spend, in whether we stay or go. This is a partnership, or it is nothing. Nate looked at her for a long time, and for the first time since he'd ridden up, something in his posture changed. He straightened, not in defiance, in recognition, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. And what he saw was not the desperate woman he'd expected, but someone who had survived his failure and come out the other side with her spine intact. Yes, ma'am, he said. All of it. Yes. Eleanor nodded. She looked at the rose one more time. You can keep that, she said, turning back to the laundry line. Plant it at the ranch if it'll grow. I'd rather see a live rose than a dead one. She picked up the laundry basket and walked toward the back door. Miss Bennett? Maid called. She stopped. She didn't turn around. I didn't think you'd still be here, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Eleanor stood there for a moment. The heat pressed down. The sheets moved in the faint breeze. Somewhere down the road, the ticket agent was closing his window for the afternoon. Neither did I, she said. She walked inside, and Nathaniel Cole stood in the yard with a dead rose in his hand, and the full weight of what he had almost lost pressing down on his chest like a stone. Adelaide was waiting in the kitchen. That your man? She asked. That's the man who was supposed to be my husband, yes. He looks like he hasn't slept in a week. Good, Eleanor said. That makes two of us. Adelaide poured 2 cups of coffee and pushed one across the table. Sit down. Tell me what you're thinking. Eleanor sat. She wrapped her hands around the cup but didn't drink. I'm thinking that I have no money, no way home, and no guarantees. I'm thinking that I traveled 1,100 miles to marry a stranger, and the stranger couldn't even show up on time. I'm thinking that every sensible part of me says go home. And the part that ain't sensible? Eleanor looked at her. That part says he told me the truth just now. The flood was real. The fear was real. And a man who admits to cowardice is either very honest or very stupid. And either way, he's not the worst foundation for a marriage. Adelaide sipped her coffee. You know what my first husband said to me on our wedding day? What? He said, Adelaide, I'm probably going to disappoint you. And I said, Henry, I'm counting on it. Just don't bore me. She set the cup down. He didn't. Disappointed me regular as Sunday, but he never once bored me. Is that advice? That's history. You do with it what you want. Adelaide stood. The preacher's at the church until 4. If you're going to marry that man, do it before supper. I ain't feeding him for free. They married at 3:40 in the afternoon. The church was empty except for Adelaide, who stood as witness, and the preacher's wife, who played a hymn on an out-of-tune piano that made the whole ceremony sound slightly like a funeral. Eleanor wore her traveling dress. It was wrinkled. She didn't care. Nate wore the same clothes he'd ridden in. He smelled like dust and horse and something sharp underneath. Fear, maybe. Or just the particular scent of a man who knows he doesn't deserve what he's getting and is terrified of ruining it. The preacher asked the standard questions. Do you take this woman? I do. Do you take this man? Eleanor paused. Not for drama, not for effect. She paused because she wanted to feel the weight of the words before she said them. She wanted to stand inside this moment and know, really know, that she was choosing this. "I do," she said. And she meant it the way you mean something when you've already survived the worst version of it. They signed the register. Adelaide signed as witness. The preacher's wife stopped playing. Outside, the sun was still brutal. The town was still watching. A boy on the porch of the general store pointed and said, loud enough, "That's the mail order lady. She finally got her cowboy." Eleanor didn't react. Nate did. He stopped walking. He turned toward the boy, and he said, in a voice quiet enough that only Eleanor and the boy could hear, "She ain't a mail order anything. She's my wife. And you'll speak about her with respect, or you won't speak about her at all." The boy went pale. He nodded once and disappeared inside the store. Nate turned back to Eleanor. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just tipped his hat slightly and kept walking toward the wagon. Eleanor followed. She didn't smile, but something inside her, something that had been clenched tight since the second day on that platform, loosened. Just a fraction. Just enough to breathe. They loaded her trunk onto the wagon. Nate offered his hand to help her up. She took it, the first time they had touched. His grip was rough and warm, and his hand trembled slightly. And she pretended not to notice because she understood already that his pride was the most fragile thing about him. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "It's a 2-day ride to the ranch," he said. "Maybe 3, depending on the roads." "Then we'd better get started," Eleanor said. Nate nodded. He clicked his tongue. The horses pulled forward. Behind them, the platform shrank. The ticket window. The bench where she'd slept. The road where she'd set her trunk down and nearly given up. Eleanor didn't look back. She had already survived the waiting. Whatever came next would have to try harder than that. The wagon hit its first rut before they'd gone 2 miles, and Eleanor grabbed the side rail hard enough to feel the wood bite her palm. Nate glanced at her. "You all right?" "Fine." "Roads get worse past the river." "I said I'm fine, Mr. Cole." He turned back to the horses. She could see his jaw clench. That same chewing motion, like he was grinding down words he wanted to say, but didn't know how to shape. They rode in silence for nearly an hour. The heat didn't let up. Eleanor's dress clung to her back, and sweat traced a line down her neck that she refused to wipe, because wiping meant moving. And moving meant acknowledging that she was uncomfortable, and she would not give this man one more thing to feel guilty about. "There's water in the back," Nate said without looking at her. "Canteen. Under the blanket." "I'm not thirsty." "You haven't had anything since this morning." "How would you know what I've had?" Nate pulled the reins gently, and the wagon slowed. He turned to her full on for the first time since they'd left town. "Because Adelaide told me. She said you worked through breakfast and didn't eat. She said you've barely eaten in 5 days. His voice dropped. "She said you gave your last biscuit to a child at the station on your second night." Eleanor's throat tightened. She hadn't known Adelaide had seen that. "Drink the water," Mate said. "Please." She reached back, found the canteen, and drank. The water was warm and tasted like tin, but it hit her stomach like mercy. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me for water. That's the lowest bar a man can clear." "Then clear it quietly, Mr. Cole." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one, the kind that shows up uninvited and leaves before you can name it. He clicked the horses forward. They made it another 3 miles before the wheel broke. It wasn't dramatic. There was no crack of wood, no violent stop. Just a slow grinding sound, then a lean to the left that got worse with every yard, until Nate pulled up and said a word under his breath that Eleanor pretended not to hear. He climbed down. She watched him crouch by the rear wheel, running his hands along the rim where two spokes had splintered clean through. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough we're not moving until I fix it." "Can you fix it?" "I can rig something. Need to find a branch strong enough to brace it." He stood and looked at the road ahead, then behind. Nothing. Nobody. Just flat land and heat shimmer and the faint line of trees maybe half a mile south. "I'll be back inside an hour." "I'll come with you." "No need. Stay with the wagon." "I didn't ask if there was a need, Mr. Cole. I said I'll come with you." He looked at her. She could see him calculating, weighing whether this was a battle worth fighting on the first day of a marriage that was already hanging by a thread. "All right," he said. They walked. The sun was merciless. Eleanor's boots were not made for this terrain. They were Philadelphia boots, city boots, and every step reminded her of that fact with a fresh blister. She didn't mention it. She wouldn't. "You're limping," Mate said. "I'm walking on uneven ground." "You're limping, Eleanor." She stopped, not because of the name, though hearing him say Eleanor instead of Miss Bennett sent something through her she wasn't ready to examine. She stopped because her right boot had finally given up entirely, and she could feel blood between her toes. Nate saw at the same moment she did, the dark stain spreading across the leather. He didn't ask permission. He knelt down in the dirt and reached for her boot. "Don't," she said. "Your foot's bleeding." "I'm aware." "Let me see it." "You are not taking off my boot on a public road on the first day of our marriage. There's nobody on this road for 20 miles. That doesn't change what's proper." Nate looked up at her from the ground. His hat had fallen back, and for the first time she could see his full face without shadow, the lines around his eyes, the scar that ran along his left temple and disappeared into his hairline, the way his brows pulled together not in frustration, but in something that looked terribly like tenderness. "Eleanor," he said, "I let you down once already. I'm not going to sit here and watch you bleed because of what's proper. Now give me your foot, or I'll carry you back to that wagon, and you can be mad at me for 2 different things instead of 1. She gave him her foot. He removed the boot gently, more gently than she'd expected from hands that size. The blister had torn open across her heel, raw and angry. He pulled a clean cloth from his back pocket. She didn't ask why a rancher carried clean cloth. She'd learn later it was because he still carried field dressings out of habit, the war never quite leaving his pockets, and wrapped her foot with the efficiency of a man who had done this before, many times, for wounds much worse. "There," he said. "That'll hold until we reach the relay station." "There's a relay station?" "About 8 miles ahead. We can rest there tonight. Get the wheel fixed proper in the morning." He stood. He offered his hand. She took it, the second time they had touched, and let him pull her up. "I'm going to ruin this cloth," she said, looking down at the wrapping. "I've got more." "You carry bandages in your pocket." "Old habit." "From the war?" The change was immediate. His face closed like a door slamming shut. Not angry, just gone. Whatever had been open a moment ago sealed itself behind something she recognized because she'd seen it in the mirror every morning for 5 days. The face of a person who has learned to survive by compartmentalizing, by putting the worst things in boxes and nailing them shut. "We should find that branch," Nate said, and turned toward the trees. Eleanor didn't push. She filed it away. One more piece of the man she had married, but did not yet know. They found a suitable branch. Nate rigged the wheel with the grim competence of someone used to fixing things alone. And within the hour, they were moving again. The relay station appeared just before sundown. A squat building with a sagging porch and a corral full of horses that looked as tired as Eleanor felt. A painted sign read, "Dawson's Station," in letters so faded they were more memory than word. Inside, the station keeper, a thick-necked man named Dawson who smelled like pipe tobacco and bacon grease, looked them over. "Room for two?" "2 rooms," Eleanor said. Dawson's eyebrows climbed. He looked at Nate. Nate said nothing. "Only got 1 room left," Dawson said. "Stagecoach came through this morning. Full house tonight." "Then I'll sleep in the wagon," Nate said. "It's gonna rain," Dawson said. "Then I'll sleep in a wet wagon." Dawson looked at Eleanor again, with that particular expression men reserve for situations they find amusing and women find exhausting. "Your wife know you're this stubborn?" Dawson asked. "She's learning," Eleanor said. Dawson gave her the key. The room was small and hot and smelled like other people's sweat, but it had a bed with a mattress and a door that locked, and after 5 days on a train platform bench, Eleanor would have wept at the sight of it if she were the weeping kind. She sat on the bed. She took off her boots, carefully, the right ones sticky with blood. She unwrapped the bandage Nate had tied, examined the blister, and rewrapped it with a strip of cloth torn from her petticoat. A knock at the door. "It's me," Nate said from the other side. "I brought supper." She opened the door. He stood there holding 2 tin plates, beans, bread, and something that might have been meat in a previous life. "You should eat," he said. She took a plate. He turned to go. "Mr. Cole?" He stopped. "You said full honesty," she said. "About everything." "I did." "Then I have questions, and I expect answers." He stood in the doorway, holding his plate, and she could see the fight happening behind his eyes, the part of him that wanted to run, and the part that had promised not to. "Ask," he said. "The ranch. How bad is it?" "It's standing, barely. The flood took the south fence and half the hay barn. Creek's still high. I lost 9 head. Got maybe 40 left." 40 cattle. Is that enough?" "For now. Not for winter." "The house?" "Roof leaks. Kitchen stove works. Bedroom's dry. Parlor smells like creek water." "How much money do you have?" He hesitated. This was harder, she could tell. Not because he wanted to lie, but because the truth was the kind that makes a man feel small. $47, he said. "And what's in the cattle?" $47. She let that sit. "I had $6.40 when you found me. That makes us worth $53.40 combined." She took a bite of bread. "My father's estate was worth less than that when he died, and my mother kept 3 children alive on it for 4 years. So we'll manage." Nate stared at her. "You're not angry about the money?" "I'm angry about the 5 days, Mr. Cole. The money is just math." "You can call me Nate." "I'll call you Nate when you've earned it." He nodded. He deserved that. "Next question," Eleanor said. "The nightmares." His hand tightened on the plate. The tremor came back, visible now, the fork rattling against the tin. "What about them?" he said. "How often?" 3, 4 nights a week." "Since the war?" "Since Chickamauga." She didn't flinch at the name. She knew the battle. Every schoolteacher in Philadelphia knew it. The way you know a wound by the scar it leaves on a generation. 16,000 Union casualties in 2 days. "Were you wounded?" she asked. "Not the way you mean." "What way then?" Nate set his plate down on the floor. He put both hands on his knees and pressed down, the way a man does when he's trying to hold himself in place. "I was a sergeant," he said. 32 men under my command. We held a position on the left flank for 6 hours. By the end, I had 11 men left. 6 of them couldn't walk. I carried 2 of them out on my back. He paused. The other 4, I had to leave. The room was very quiet. I hear them, Nate said. At night, calling my name, asking why I left. And I don't have an answer that's good enough, Eleanor. I've been looking for 11 years, and I don't have one. Eleanor set her plate beside his on the floor. She looked at this man, this stranger she had married 6 hours ago, and saw something she had not expected. Not weakness, but the particular kind of strength it takes to carry a wound you can't show anyone and keep walking. I can't fix that, she said. I know. I'm not going to try to fix that. I wouldn't want you to. But I can sit with it, she said. If you'll let me. I can know about it, and I can be in the next room when it happens, and I won't pretend it's not there. That's what I can offer. Is that enough? Nate looked at her for a long time. His eyes were wet, but nothing fell. Whatever wall he'd built was too well made for that. But the cracks were there, and through them she could see the man who had written her 17 letters full of careful hope and quiet desperation. That's more than anyone's offered in 11 years, he said. Then we understand each other. He picked up his plate. He stood. He nodded once, a small, tight movement, like a man closing a deal he can't quite believe went in his favor. Good night, Miss Bennett, he said. Good night, Mr. Cole. He walked down the hallway toward the porch. She closed the door. She locked it. She sat on the bed and stared at the wall and tried to make sense of what she was feeling. This strange, unfamiliar thing that was not love, not yet, but was maybe the ground that love could grow in if they were careful and honest and very, very stubborn. She fell asleep with her boots on the floor and her foot throbbing and the sound of rain starting on the roof. And she thought of Nathaniel Cole sleeping in a wet wagon in the yard because he had made her a promise about separate rooms, and he was the kind of man who would drown before he broke his word. The next morning, Eleanor was up before the sun. She found Nate in the corral, soaked to the bone, checking the wagon wheel he'd rigged the day before. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his shirt was so wet it had gone transparent, and she could see the scar on his back. A long, ragged line that ran from his left shoulder blade to his waist. She didn't ask about it. Not yet. The wheel will hold, he said, without turning around. Dawson's got a spare spoke. He's letting me have it for $2. That leaves us $51.40, Eleanor said. He turned and looked at her. She was standing there in her wrinkled traveling dress, with her hair pinned up and her jaws set. And something passed across his face that he covered quickly with the brim of his hat. But not quickly enough. You kept count, he said. I told you. The money is just math. Most women would have. Don't finish that sentence, Mr. Cole. He almost smiled. Almost. Yes, ma'am. They loaded the wagon. Dawson came out to see them off, chewing on a piece of jerky and squinting at the sky. You've got 2 days of hard road ahead, Dawson said. There's a shortcut past Miller's Ridge, but I wouldn't take it. Ground's soft from the flood. Lost a whole freight wagon down there last month. We'll take the main road, Nate said. Smart man. Dawson looked at Eleanor. You ever driven a wagon, ma'am? No. Might want to learn. That country out there don't care what you can and can't do. It just comes at you. Then it'll find me ready, Eleanor said. Dawson grinned, a rare thing for a station keeper. I reckon it will. They rode. The road was worse than the day before. Deep ruts filled with muddy water from the overnight rain, rocks that rattled the wagon like bones in a tin cup. Eleanor gripped the rail and said nothing. Nate drove with that same grim focus, reading the road the way she'd seen sea captains read water, watching for the thing that could sink you. By noon, they reached a crossroads where a small group of travelers had stopped. 2 wagons, a family with 3 children, and a man on horseback who looked like he'd been riding hard and hadn't stopped for days. The horseman looked up as Nate pulled alongside. "You headed west?" the man asked. His voice was hoarse. His clothes were trail dirty. "Wyoming Territory," Nate said. "You might want to hold up. There's trouble on the road past the fork. Creek's running high. A stagecoach tried to cross yesterday and lost its front axle. They're still pulling it out." Nate looked at Eleanor. She looked back. "How far to the crossing?" Nate asked. "About 6 miles. There's a ford upstream, but it's rough. You'd need to unload your wagon to make it light enough." "Then we unload," Eleanor said. Nate turned to her. "It's dangerous." "So is sitting still." The family by the wagons was watching them. The mother, a young woman with a baby on her hip and a face that looked 20 years older than it should, called out, Ma'am, please, my boy's got a fever. You wouldn't have any willow bark, would you? Or any medicine at all?" Eleanor climbed down from the wagon before Nate could stop her. She walked to the woman and put her hand on the child's forehead. He was maybe 4 years old, his cheeks flushed red and his eyes glassy. "How long?" Eleanor asked. "Since last night. It came on fast. We've been on the road for a week and I don't have anything left to give him." The woman's voice cracked. "The nearest doctor is in Cedar Falls, and that's 2 days east, and I can't go backwards, ma'am. I can't. My husband's waiting for us in Montana, and if I go backwards, I don't know if I'll have the strength to turn around again." Eleanor looked back at the wagon. "Mr. Cole, the supply box. Is there willow bark?" Nate was already reaching for it. He brought the box to her, and she found the bark, dried, wrapped in cloth, and a small bottle of vinegar. "Boil water," she told the woman. "Steep the bark for 10 minutes. Let it cool enough to drink. Give him small sips. The vinegar. Mix a capful with water and use it to cool his skin, wrists, neck, forehead." "Are you a doctor?" the woman asked. "I'm a school teacher, but I grew up in a house with 3 children and a mother who couldn't afford one." The woman took the bark and the vinegar with shaking hands. Her eyes filled. "I don't have money to—" "I didn't ask for money." "God bless you, ma'am. God bless you." Eleanor touched the child's cheek. "He'll be all right. Children are tougher than we think. They just need someone to fight for them." She walked back to the wagon. Nate was standing there, watching her with an expression she couldn't read, or maybe could read perfectly well, but wasn't ready to name. "Don't say it," she said, climbing back up. "Say what?" "Whatever you're thinking." "I was thinking," Nate said quietly, "that I should have come on time." Eleanor looked at him. Something shifted between them. Not a wall coming down, but a window opening. Small, just a crack, enough to feel the air move through. "Yes," she said, "you should have." Nate picked up the reins. He clicked his tongue. The horses pulled forward. Behind them, the mother was boiling water, and the sick boy was lying in his mother's lap. And the world was full of women trying to get somewhere with nothing but stubbornness and grace. Eleanor understood every one of them. They reached the swollen creek by mid-afternoon. The horseman had been right. It was running fast and brown, thick with mud and debris from the flood. The stagecoach wreck was still visible downstream, its front end buried in the bank like a dead animal. "We unload," Nate said. They unloaded. Eleanor carried what she could, the supply box, the bedding, her trunk. Nate took the heavier things, the toolbox, the feed sacks, the spare lumber he'd brought for fence repair. When the wagon was light enough, Nate unhitched the horses and led them across first, one at a time. The water reached his waist. He didn't hesitate, but Eleanor saw his hands shaking when he came back for the second horse, and she understood that this was not just a creek. This was every river he'd ever crossed under fire, every body of water that had tried to take something from him. "I can drive the wagon across," she said. "No." "You're shaking, mate." She'd said his name. First time. It slipped out, not from affection, but from urgency. The way you call someone's real name when pretense has no place. He heard it. She saw it register, a flicker in his eyes, quick as lightning, and just as bright. "I'm fine," he said. "You're not fine. Your hands haven't stopped shaking since you got in that water. Let me drive it across. You walk the horses from the bank. You said you've never driven a wagon." "Then I'll learn. Right now. Show me." He stared at her. The creek roared between them, and the afternoon was burning away, and everything about this moment was wrong. Too fast, too dangerous, too much to ask of a woman who had never held reins in her life. But she was standing there, with mud on her dress and blood on her boot and her chin raised, and Nate Cole recognized something in that posture. He'd seen it at Chickamauga, in the faces of men who were terrified, but moving forward anyway. Not because they weren't afraid, but because standing still was worse. "Left rein turns left," he said. "Right rein turns right. Pull both to stop. Keep the horses' heads upstream. If they turn broadside, the current takes you. Go slow. Don't fight the water. Let the wagon find its footing. Left, right, both, upstream, slow. Yeah. Get to the other side, Mr. Cole. I'll bring your wagon across." He waded back through the creek. He stood on the far bank with the horses and watched her climb up onto the wagon seat, small against the sky, her dress soaked to the knees from loading, her hands gripping the reins like they were the last solid thing in the world. She drove into the water. The current hit the wheels and the wagon lurched. Eleanor's arms burned. The reins bit into her palms. The horses fought her. They wanted to turn, wanted to run, wanted out of this brown, churning mess. She held them. She held them with everything she had. "Upstream!" Nate shouted from the bank. "Keep them upstream!" She pulled the left rein. The horses straightened. The wagon found its line. The water rose to the axle, then higher, and for one terrible moment she felt the wheels lift, felt the whole thing begin to float. And she leaned forward and drove those horses with her voice, with her weight, with a will that had been forged on a train platform in Missouri and tempered in 5 days of silence and shame. The front wheels hit the far bank. The horses surged. The wagon rocked forward and up and out of the water, and Eleanor was on dry ground, dripping and shaking and alive. Nate caught the bridle of the lead horse. His face was white. "You all right?" he asked. Eleanor's hands were still locked on the reins. Her fingers wouldn't open. "I just drove a wagon across a river," she said. "You did?" "I've never driven a wagon before today." "I know." She looked at him. He looked at her, and something passed between them that neither of them spoke. An understanding, maybe, or an agreement, or just the simple recognition that they were both still here, on the same side of the water, and that counted for something. "Mr. Cole," Eleanor said. "Yeah?" "You can call me Eleanor." The corner of his mouth moved, that ghost smile again, faint as a scar, but there. "All right, Eleanor." They reloaded the wagon in silence. They hitched the horses. They climbed back up onto the seat, side by side, closer than before by maybe 2 inches. a distance that meant nothing and everything. The road stretched west. The sun was dropping. Somewhere ahead, a ranch was waiting with a leaking roof and a flooded creek, and 40 head of cattle, and not enough money, and not enough certainty, and not enough of anything, except two people who had chosen each other not out of love, but out of something older and harder. The belief that choosing was enough. Nate drove. Eleanor sat beside him. Her foot throbbed. Her hands ached. Her dress was ruined. She didn't care. She had crossed the river. The ranch was smaller than she'd imagined. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon and stood in the yard and felt every letter Nate had ever written rearrange itself in her mind. He'd described a working cattle ranch in Wyoming territory. He hadn't lied. But he'd written the way lonely men write, with hope filling in the gaps that honesty would have left bare. "This is it," Nate said behind her. He said it flat, the way a man says something when he's already bracing for the reaction. Eleanor walked to the front door. She pushed it open. She stepped inside. She stood there for 10 seconds. Then she rolled up her sleeves. "Where's the broom?" she said. Nate was still standing in the yard. "What?" "The broom, Mr. Cole. Where do you keep it?" Under the stairs." "Thank you." She found it. She started sweeping. The dust rose around her like ghosts being evicted, and she swept them all toward the door, without ceremony or sentiment. Nate watched her from the porch. He opened his mouth twice and closed it both times. Then he went to unload the wagon, because that was something he knew how to do. And right now, knowing how to do anything felt like a gift. By nightfall, Eleanor had swept every room, scrubbed the kitchen table with sand and vinegar, boiled water on the stove, and made a meal out of dried beans and the last of the bread from Dawson's station. It wasn't good. It was food. That was enough. They ate in silence at the kitchen table, the first meal in their house, if you could call it theirs, if you could call it a house. "The south fence," Eleanor said. "How long to rebuild it?" "A week, maybe more. Depends on the ground." "And the hay barn?" 2 weeks if I work alone." "You're not alone." Nate set his fork down. "Eleanor, ranch work isn't—" "Finish that sentence carefully." He picked his fork back up. "I was going to say, it isn't easy." "Neither was crossing that creek. What time do we start?" "Dawn." "Then I'll have coffee ready at 4:30. She stood, took both plates, and washed them in the basin. Nate sat at the table and watched her back, the straight line of her spine, the way her shoulders carried weight without curving under it, and he thought about the letters again. He'd written to a woman he imagined. The woman washing dishes in his kitchen was someone else entirely. Someone better. Someone terrifying. "Your room's at the end of the hall," he said. "I put fresh bedding in this morning, before I left to get you." He paused. 5 days ago." "I know when it was." "The door locks from the inside." "Good. Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Mr. Cole." She walked down the hall. She closed the door. She locked it. She sat on the bed and pressed her palms flat against the mattress and breathed. Really breathed. For the first time in a week. She was here. She had arrived. She had crossed a river and married a stranger and swept his house and eaten his beans, and she was here, in Wyoming territory, in a room that smelled like cedar and creek water. And she was alive. She didn't sleep well, but she slept. And at 4:30, the coffee was ready. The first 3 days at the ranch were a negotiation with the land itself. Eleanor learned to haul water from the well, 20 pounds per bucket, 4 trips before breakfast. She learned to split kindling, to keep the stove fed without choking it, to hang meat in the smoke shed where the flies couldn't reach it. Her hands blistered, then bled, then blistered again on top of the blood. She wrapped them with strips of cloth and kept working. Nate watched her the way he watched everything, quietly, from a distance, like a man afraid that getting too close might break something. On the fourth morning, a rider came up the road. Eleanor was hanging wash on the line. She seemed destined to be found this way, when she heard the horse. She turned and saw a young man, maybe 22, with sun-darkened skin and a hat pushed so far back on his head it was barely there at all. He pulled up at the fence and looked at her with undisguised curiosity. "You the new Mrs. Cole?" he asked. "I'm Eleanor Cole, yes." "Thomas Reed." He tipped his hat, or what was left of the gesture, given the hat's position. "I work for Nate, or I did, before the flood. Came to see if there was still a ranch to work on." "There is," Eleanor said. "It needs work." "Most things worth keeping do." Thomas swung down from his horse and tied it to the fence post. He was lean and quick-moving, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from growing up in a saddle. "Nate inside?" "He's at the south fence." "I'll ride out to him." Thomas paused. He looked at her hands, the cloth wrappings, the raw skin visible at the edges. "You've been working the ranch." "Someone had to." "Nate didn't mention he was getting a ranch hand for a wife." "Nate didn't mention a lot of things." Thomas grinned. It was a wide, uncomplicated grin, the kind that belongs to people who haven't yet learned to hide what they feel. "I think I'm going to like you, Mrs. Cole. That remains to be seen, Mr. Reed. Go find your boss." He rode out. Eleanor went back to the wash. But something had shifted. The ranch, which had felt like an island for 3 days, now had a bridge to the world outside. Whether that was a good thing, she wasn't sure yet. Thomas came back with Nate at noon. They ate together at the kitchen table. Eleanor's beans again, but this time with wild onions she'd found growing near the creek. "These are good," Thomas said on his second plate. "They're beans," Eleanor said. "They're good beans." He looked at Nate. "The south fence is worse than I thought. We need new posts, at least 12. "I know. Cedar Grove up past Harper's place has what we need. But that means asking Harper." Nate's jaw tightened. "Who's Harper?" Eleanor asked. Thomas and Nate exchanged a look. The kind of look men exchange when they're deciding whether to tell a woman something they think she won't like. "Don't do that," Eleanor said. "Do what?" Nate asked. "Look at each other like you're deciding what I can handle. Who is Harper?" Nate set his fork down. "Old Mr. Harper. He's got the property north of ours. Biggest spread in the valley. He's been ranching here since before the war, and he believes that gives him the right to have opinions about everyone else's business." "What kind of opinions?" "The kind that says Eastern women don't belong out here. The kind that says mail-order marriages are a disgrace. The kind that says I should have married a local girl who knows which end of a cow to feed." "Has he said this to you?" "He said it to everyone who'll listen." Eleanor took Nate's plate and Thomas's plate and stacked them. "Then we'll need those cedar posts, and I'll go with you to get them." "Eleanor, I didn't ask permission, Mr. Cole." Thomas let out a low whistle. "Oh, I definitely like her." "Shut up, Thomas," Nate said. But the ghost smile was there again, faint as a hairline crack in stone. They rode to Harper's place the next morning, all three of them, Nate driving the wagon, Eleanor beside him, Thomas on horseback alongside. Harper was on his porch when they arrived. He was 70 if he was a day, white-haired, wire-thin, with eyes like a hawk watching a mouse cross an open field. He didn't stand when they pulled up. He didn't tip his hat. He just sat there in his chair and let them come to him, because that was the kind of man he was. "Cole," he said. Just the name, no greeting. "Mr. Harper," Mate said. "I need cedar posts, 12 of them. I'm willing to pay fair price, or trade labor for them." Harper's eyes moved to Eleanor. He looked at her the way you look at a piece of furniture someone's brought into a room where it doesn't belong. "This your Eastern bride?" he said. "This is my wife," Nate said. His voice had an edge Eleanor hadn't heard before. Not anger, but a warning. A line being drawn. "Heard you were 5 days late picking her up." Harper rocked in his chair. "Heard she sat at that station like a lost calf waiting for its mother." Eleanor felt the heat rise in her chest. She felt Nate stiffen beside her. She felt Thomas shift on his horse. "Mr. Harper," she said. Her voice was even, steady. The schoolteacher voice, the one that could quiet a room of 30 children without raising a single decibel. "My name is Eleanor Cole. I understand you have opinions about my marriage and my origins. You're welcome to them. But right now, my husband needs cedar posts to rebuild a fence that's keeping 40 head of cattle alive, and your grove has what we need. So I'd like to discuss terms." Harper stared at her. His jaw worked. Something flickered in those hawk eyes. Not respect. Not yet. But surprise. The kind of surprise a man feels when the mouse turns around and looks him dead in the face. 12 posts, Harper said. $10 or 3 days' labor. $5 and 2 days' labor, Eleanor said. The posts are standing in your grove doing nothing. Our labor has value. That's a fair trade. I didn't ask for your arithmetic, woman. You got it anyway. Eleanor didn't blink. $5 and 2 days. My husband and Mr. Reed will cut the posts themselves and clear the brush while they're at it. You get a cleaned grove and $5. We get our fence. Everyone profits. Harper looked at Nate. Your wife always negotiate for you? When she's right, I let her, Nate said. Harper rocked his chair 3 more times. Then he spat off the side of the porch. $6, he said. $5.50. Done. Harper stood up, slowly, with the mechanical precision of old joints. He pointed toward the north ridge. The grove's past the creek. Cut what you need. Don't touch the old growth. Agreed, Eleanor said. She extended her hand. Harper looked at it like he'd never seen a woman's hand offered for a handshake. Then he took it. His grip was like iron. Hers didn't give. You got some nerve, Mrs. Cole, he said. I've been told. They cut the posts. 2 days of hard labor in the heat. Nate and Thomas working the axes, while Eleanor stripped branches and stacked the cut timber. Her hands split open again. She wrapped them again. She kept going. On the second evening, as they loaded the last posts onto the wagon, Thomas pulled Nate aside. Eleanor could hear them, though they thought she couldn't. She's something, Nate, Thomas said. I know. I mean it. She stood up to Harper. Nobody stands up to Harper. Even my daddy used to cross the road when he saw that man coming. I know, Thomas. So when are you going to stop calling her Miss Bennett in your head and start acting like her husband? Nate didn't answer, but Eleanor heard him exhale. A long, slow breath, like a man releasing something he'd been holding too tight for too long. They rebuilt the south fence in 4 days. Eleanor dug post holes alongside Nate and Thomas, driving the spade into ground that fought her every inch. Her shoulders ached so bad by the 3rd day she couldn't lift her arms above her head, but she was at the fence line at dawn, and she didn't leave until the light gave out. On the evening of the 4th day, they drove the last post and strung the final wire. The 3 of them stood there looking at it. A fence. Just a fence. Wood and wire and nothing more. But Eleanor felt something looking at it that she hadn't felt since before the platform. Pride. The plain, uncomplicated pride of having built something with her own hands that would stand against the wind. That's a good fence, Thomas said. That's our fence, Eleanor said. Nate looked at her when she said it. Our. She saw the word land on him. She saw what it did to his face. the way it loosened something behind his eyes, the way his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, as if a weight he'd been carrying had just been redistributed. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Hours." Then the storm came. It came fast, the way summer storms do in Wyoming. One moment the sky was brass, and the next it was black. The wind hit first, hard enough to rip a shingle off the barn roof. Then the rain. Then the sound that made Nate's face go white. Thunder. Not distant thunder. Not rolling, grumbling thunder. This was the thunder that sounds like cannon fire. The sharp, splitting kind that shakes the ground under your feet and makes horses scream, and makes men who survive Chickamauga grab the edge of a table and hold on. Nate grabbed the table. Eleanor saw it happen. 1 second he was standing by the window. The next he was on his knees, with both hands wrapped around the table leg, and his eyes gone. Not closed, but empty. Wherever he was, it wasn't Wyoming. It wasn't 1878. He was somewhere 11 years behind them, on a field in Georgia, where 32 men became 11, and 4 of them never came home. "Nate," she knelt beside him. "Nate, it's Eleanor. You're in your kitchen. You're home." He didn't hear her. His breathing was ragged, fast, shallow, the breathing of a man under fire. "Nate!" She put her hand on his arm. He flinched so hard he nearly knocked her backwards. His eyes were wild. For one terrible second, he didn't know her. "It's me," she said, firm, steady, the way you talk to a drowning man. "It's Eleanor. You're in Wyoming. The war is over. You're safe." His breathing slowed. His eyes found her. Recognition came back in pieces. First her voice, then her face, then the kitchen around them. Then the storm outside that was just a storm, and not artillery, and not death, and not Chickamauga. "Eleanor," he said. Her name sounded like it cost him everything he had. "I'm here. I'm sorry. I—" "Don't apologize. Not for this. Never for this." He let go of the table. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't make fists. She took them, both of them, and held them between her own. And she didn't squeeze, and she didn't stroke, and she didn't try to make it better. She just held on. They stayed like that on the kitchen floor while the storm raged outside. Then Thomas burst through the door, soaked and wild-eyed. "The cattle!" he shouted. "The south fence! The new fence! A tree came down on it! The cattle are scattering! If they hit the creek, we'll lose them!" Nate was on his feet before Thomas finished speaking. Whatever had been broken a moment ago was sealed shut. The soldier overriding the wounded man. Duty overriding damage. "How many?" Nate asked. "I counted at least 20 heading south. The rest are still penned, but they're panicking." "Saddle my horse." "Already done." Nate grabbed his hat and his coat. He was at the door when Eleanor grabbed his arm. "Your hands are still shaking," she said. "I know." "You can barely hold the reins." "I know." "Then I'm going with you." "No." "Nate!" "No, Eleanor. The creek is flooding. If those cattle hit the water, it'll be a wall of mud and 1,000 pounds of panicked animal. You go near that, you die. Do you understand me? You die." "And if you go near it with hands that can't hold a rope?" He looked at her. The storm screamed outside. Thomas was already mounted, shouting something about the South Ridge. And Nate Cole stood in the doorway of his own house, looking at a woman he had married 9 days ago, and every line on his face said the same thing. "I cannot lose you too." "Stay here," he said. "Please." He rode out into the storm. Eleanor stood in the doorway and watched them disappear. 2 riders swallowed by rain and darkness, and the sound of 40 cattle running blind. She waited 10 minutes. She waited 15. At 20 minutes, she heard it. A sound that rose above the storm like a scream from the earth itself. The creek. It wasn't just flooding. It was tearing its banks apart. And somewhere in that darkness, Nate was riding toward it with shaking hands and a head full of ghosts. Eleanor grabbed Nate's spare coat from the hook by the door. She pulled on his old boots, 3 sizes too big. She ran to the barn, and she saddled the one horse left, an old mare named Bess, who looked at Eleanor with the weary patience of an animal who has survived too many storms to be afraid of another one. "I know," Eleanor said, tightening the cinch. "I've never done this either." She rode out. The rain hit her like a fist. She couldn't see 10 feet ahead. She followed the sound, the cattle bawling, Thomas shouting, and underneath it all, the creek roaring like a living thing. She found Thomas first. He was on the ridge, trying to turn a group of cattle back from the drop-off above the creek. His horse was wild-eyed and fighting him. "Where's Nate?" Eleanor screamed over the wind. Thomas pointed downstream. "He went after the ones that broke through. I couldn't stop him. Eleanor, the bank's giving way down there." She didn't hear the rest. She was already riding. Bess knew the land better than Eleanor did, and the old mare picked her way down the slope with the sureness of long memory. Eleanor held on and let her go, trusting the horse because she had no other choice. She found him at the bend in Hart's Creek. Nate was on the ground. His horse was gone. Bolted or thrown, she couldn't tell. He was lying on the bank with his left leg twisted at an angle that made Eleanor's stomach drop. 3 feet from him, the creek was tearing past. Brown water full of branches and mud and the carcass of a steer that had already gone in. "Nate!" He looked up. His face was gray. "Eleanor, I told you to stay, and I told you I didn't come 1,100 miles to sit in a kitchen." She dismounted and nearly fell. The boots were too big, and the ground was mud, and everything was wrong. She crawled to him on her hands and knees. "Your leg." "It's broken, or close to it. Horse threw me when the bank collapsed." "Can you stand?" I don't know." "Then we'll find out." She got her shoulder under his arm. She was 5'4" and 120 pounds, and he was 6'2" and 190. And what she was trying to do was impossible. She did it anyway. She heaved him upright. He screamed, a raw animal sound that the storm swallowed whole. "Bess!" Eleanor shouted. The old mare was standing 10 yards up the bank, ears flat, but steady. "I need to get you to the horse." "Leave me. Get yourself out. The bank's going—" "Shut up, Nate." "Eleanor." "I said shut up. I am not leaving you by this creek. I am not going to be the woman who waited at another station while the man she married disappeared. You hear me? I am done waiting. Now move your legs." He moved. God help him, he moved. With Eleanor under one arm and his broken leg dragging and the creek inches from them, he moved. They reached Bess. Eleanor got him into the saddle. How, she would never be able to explain. It was adrenaline and terror and the same stubborn refusal to quit that had carried her across a river 3 days ago. She climbed up behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and kicked Bess into motion. The old mare carried them up the bank. The creek roared behind them. The ground where Nate had been lying collapsed into the water 30 seconds after they cleared it. Eleanor didn't look back. She rode. She held her husband in the saddle with arms that shook and hands that bled, and a heart that hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She rode through the rain toward the light of the ranch house, and she talked to him the whole way. Not gentle words, not sweet words, but the words that keep a man conscious when his body wants to shut down. "You stay awake, Nate Cole. You hear me? You stay with me. You don't get to ride out into a storm with shaking hands and then leave me alone in this territory. You don't get to do that. We have a fence to finish. We have a barn to rebuild. We have $47 and a leaking roof and a neighbor who thinks I don't belong here. And you do not get to die and make him right." Nate's head lolled against her shoulder. His breathing was shallow, but he was breathing. "I'm still here," he whispered. "You better be." They reached the ranch house. Thomas was already there. He'd turned the cattle back, somehow, and penned what was left. He saw them coming and ran. He pulled Nate off the horse. Eleanor slid down after him, and her legs gave out, and she hit the mud on her knees. "Is he—" Thomas started. "His leg's broken. Maybe his ribs. Get him inside." They got him inside. They laid him on the kitchen table, the same table he'd gripped during the thunder. The same table where they'd eaten beans on their first night. Eleanor splinted his leg with a broken broom handle and strips of bedsheet, the same way her mother had splinted her brother's arm when he fell from the apple tree in 1866. Nate passed out from the pain. Eleanor sat on the floor beside the table and pressed her forehead against the wood and breathed. Thomas brought her water. She drank it. "You saved him," Thomas said. "I got him off the bank, that's all." "Eleanor, the bank collapsed right after you cleared it. I saw it go. If you hadn't come—" "But I did come." She looked up. Her face was streaked with mud and rain and something else. Not tears, because she still hadn't cried. Not once. Not through any of it. Something harder than tears. Something forged. "I came because that's what partners do. They show up. Even when it's dangerous. Even when they've been told to stay home. They show up." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Then he took off his hat, properly this time, all the way off, and held it against his chest. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Eleanor stood. Her legs barely held her. Her hands were raw and bleeding. Every muscle in her body screamed. She walked to the stove. She lit the fire. She put water on to boil. Because morning was coming, and there would be coffee to make. Nate didn't wake until noon the next day. Eleanor was sitting in the chair beside the bed. His bed, because they'd moved him from the kitchen table in the early hours when Thomas found the strength to carry him. And she had not slept. She had not changed her clothes. She had not washed the mud from her face or the blood from her hands. She had sat in that chair and watched his chest rise and fall, counting breaths the way a miser counts coins, because each one meant he was still here and she was not alone in Wyoming territory with a broken ranch and no husband and a story even worse than the one she'd almost had in Missouri. His eyes opened. He stared at the ceiling. Then he turned his head and saw her. "You look terrible," he said. "You're lying in bed with a broken leg. Don't talk to me about appearances." He tried to sit up. The pain hit him like a wall, and he fell back, his jaw locked tight. A sound caught in his throat that he wouldn't let out. "Don't move," Eleanor said. "The splint's holding, but it needs a real doctor. Thomas rode to Cedar Falls at first light." "That's a full day's ride." "I know. He'll be back tomorrow with the doctor, or he won't be back at all. And either way, you're not moving from this bed." Mate closed his eyes. "The cattle?" "Thomas penned 26 before he left. We lost 8 in the flood. 6 more are scattered south. I'll find them today." "You'll find them?" "Yes. You can't ride well enough to round up cattle, Eleanor. I rode well enough to pull you off a creek bank last night. I'll manage." He opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked. The mud on her face, the torn dress, the hands wrapped in bloody cloth that she hadn't changed because changing them would mean stopping. And stopping was a luxury she hadn't earned yet. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what specifically? I'm keeping a list." For all of it. For the 5 days. For the ranch. For riding out into that storm like a damn fool when my hands couldn't hold a rope. For making you—" His voice broke. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a rope that's been fraying for years and finally gives on a Tuesday afternoon for no particular reason. For making you come after me. You didn't make me do anything. I chose to come after you. The same way I chose to get on that train. The same way I chose to marry you in that church. The same way I chose to cross that river. She leaned forward. Nate, I need you to hear something. I am not here because I had no other choice. I am here because every time this life has given me a choice, I have chosen this. I chose you. I chose this ranch. I chose to ride into that storm, and I will keep choosing it every single day until you give me a reason not to. So stop apologizing for being the thing I picked. The room was quiet. Outside, a bird was singing, something bright and stupid and alive, completely ignorant of everything that had happened in the dark. Okay, Nate said. Okay. Eleanor? What? Thank you for coming after me. She stood up. She straightened the blanket over his chest. She did it briskly, without tenderness, because tenderness would crack her open, and she could not afford to crack. Not yet. You're welcome, she said. Now stay in that bed. I have cattle to find. She walked out. She saddled Bess. She rode south. It took her 4 hours to find the 6 missing cattle. Bess did most of the work. The old mare knew the land, knew the draws and hollows where frightened animals hide. And Eleanor followed her lead, with the humility of a woman who understood that sometimes the wisest thing to do is trust something that knows more than you. She drove them back to the ranch by late afternoon. She penned them. She fed and watered all 32 head. She mucked out the stalls in the barn because it needed doing, and nobody else was going to do it. Then she went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, put her head in her arms, and shook. Not crying, shaking, the way a body shakes when the danger has passed and the muscles finally get permission to feel what they've been holding. She shook for 5 minutes. Then she stopped. She stood up. She washed her face. She made dinner. She brought Nate a plate, beans again, with the last of the wild onions and a piece of dried beef she'd found in the pantry. You found them, he said. It wasn't a question. He'd heard the cattle come in. All 6. By yourself. Bess helped. Nate ate in silence. Eleanor sat in the chair and ate hers. The quiet between them was different now. Not the cold silence of strangers or the cautious silence of new acquaintances, but something warmer. The silence of 2 people who have been through something together and don't need to narrate it. Eleanor, Nate said. You can have the parlor. What? For your school. You said you're a teacher. The ranch hands, the ones who'll come back when word gets out the fence is rebuilt. Some of them have children. Harper's got grandchildren. The Miller family west of here has 4 kids under 12. There's no school for 60 miles. He set his plate on the bedside table. The parlor's big enough. I can build benches, desks if you want them. Eleanor stared at him. Of all the things she had expected him to say, about the storm, the cattle, the leg, the money, this was not one of them. You want me to start a school, she said. I want you to do what you're good at. You came out here as a teacher. You've been working as a ranch hand because I was too broken to do it myself. But that's not all you are, and I don't want you to forget that. She looked at her hands, raw, calloused, the hands of a laborer, not a schoolteacher. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking." She took his plate. She washed it. She went to bed. She thought about it. Thomas came back the next afternoon with Dr. Avery, a man who looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts, all elbows and knees, and a nose that had clearly been broken more than once. He examined Nate's leg, pronounced it fractured but clean, reset the bone while Nate bit down on a leather strap, and Eleanor held his hand, and neither of them acknowledged the fact that this was the most they had ever touched. 6 weeks off that leg, Dr. Avery said. Minimum. You put weight on it before then, you'll limp the rest of your life. I've got a ranch to run, Nate said. You've got a wife and a hired man. Let them run it. The doctor looked at Eleanor. You the one who splinted this? Yes. Good work. Clean break, good alignment. You ever study medicine? I studied everything. That's what happens when you grow up poor. You learn whatever might keep you alive. Dr. Avery almost smiled. Well, it kept him alive. $3 for the visit. Eleanor paid him from the dwindling fund. $42.90 left. After the doctor left, Thomas sat with Eleanor on the porch. It was the first time they'd been alone together since the storm. I need to tell you something, Thomas said. Go ahead. While I was in Cedar Falls, I heard talk about you and Nate. Eleanor's stomach tightened. What kind of talk? The kind that travels fast and gets uglier with every mile. Thomas pulled his hat off and turned it in his hands. They're saying you came out here for the land. They're saying you're a mail-order opportunist who saw a broken man with property and jumped at the chance. They're saying... He stopped. Finish it. They're saying you let him get hurt on purpose, so you could take over the ranch. Eleanor sat very still. The words hit her the way the creek water had hit the wagon. A force she couldn't fight, only endure. Who's saying this? She asked. Started with a cattle broker named Guthrie, the one from the boarding house in Missouri. Guthrie, the man at breakfast, the man she'd shamed in front of Adelaide's table, the man with tobacco-stained teeth who had asked if she was the bride nobody came for. He passed through Cedar Falls last week, Thomas continued. Told anyone who'd listen that you sat at that station like a spider waiting for a fly. Said you had no money, no prospects, and you latched onto the first man desperate enough to claim you. And people believed him. Some did, some didn't, but the ones who did are the ones with the loudest mouths. Eleanor stood up. She walked to the edge of the porch. Her hands gripped the railing. Does Nate know? Not yet. Don't tell him. Eleanor. He's lying in bed with a broken leg, blaming himself for everything that's gone wrong since the day I arrived. If you tell him that the town thinks his wife is a con artist, he'll try to get up and defend me, and he'll destroy that leg, and I will not... Her voice cracked. First time. The first crack in all these weeks. She sealed it shut immediately. I will not let him hurt himself over words. Thomas watched her. Something changed in his face. The easy grin was gone, replaced by a quietness that made him look older than his 22 years. Then what do you want to do? He asked. I want to make them wrong. How? By staying. By working. By building something they can't deny. She turned to him. Thomas, how many ranch families are within a day's ride of here? Maybe 8 or 9? Why? How many of them have children? Most of them. And how many of those children can read? Thomas blinked. I don't... Maybe a few? There's no school out here. Nearest one's in Cedar Falls. There is now, Eleanor said. There's one right here, in our parlor, free of charge. Every child within riding distance. She stepped forward. You spread the word. You ride to every ranch in this valley, and you tell them that Eleanor Cole is opening a school. Monday through Friday. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and American history. Any child who can get here is welcome. You think they'll come? I think a mother will ride through fire to give her child an education. I've seen it. I was that child. Thomas put his hat back on. What about Harper? What about him? He's got 3 grandchildren, 2 boys and a girl, smart kids. But he'd sooner eat his boots than send them to a school run by an Eastern mail order bride. Then I'll have to change his mind. How? Eleanor looked out past the porch, toward the North Ridge, toward Harper's property, toward the cedar grove where she'd negotiated $5.50 worth of fence posts from a man who thought she didn't belong. By being too good to ignore, she said. Thomas rode out that afternoon. Eleanor went inside and told Nate. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The parlor needs new floorboards." "I know. And the windows don't seal right. Come winter, it'll be cold." "I'll fix them." "You'll fix them. Or I'll learn how. Same difference." Nate shook his head, not in disagreement, but in the particular wonder of a man who keeps underestimating a woman and keeps being proven wrong. "What do you need?" he asked. "Lumber for benches, slate if we can find it, chalk, paper, books, any books. I can teach without them, but it's better with." "Adelaide," Nate said. "What about her?" "She's got books, boxes of them. Her second husband was a printer. When he died, she kept everything. I saw them in her attic years ago. She might sell them cheap, or she might give them to you if you ask right." Eleanor felt something bloom in her chest, small, tentative, like a seed pushing through hard ground. Not hope. She'd been burned by hope before. Something sturdier. Purpose. "I'll write to her," Eleanor said. "Today." She wrote the letter that evening. She wrote it at the kitchen table by lamplight, while Nate slept in the next room and the ranch settled into the sounds of night. Cattle lowing, the creak of the windmill, the far-off howl of something wild that she was learning not to fear. "Dear Mrs. Mercer," she wrote, "I am writing to you from the kitchen of a ranch in Wyoming Territory, with blistered hands and $42 to my name. I am starting a school. I have no books, no slate, and no desks. I have a parlor with bad floorboards and windows that don't seal. What I do have is a valley full of children who cannot read, and a stubborn conviction that ignorance is a more dangerous enemy than any storm or flood or gossip this territory can throw at me. Nate tells me you have books. I am asking not for charity, but for partnership. Send me what you can spare. I will put every word to use. Respectfully, Eleanor Cole." She sealed the letter and set it on the table. Thomas would take it to the post when he rode out in the morning. 3 weeks passed. The school opened on a Monday. 2 children came the first day. A boy named Samuel, 8 years old, son of a ranch hand named Wilkins, who worked the property south of them, and a girl named Lucy, 10, whose mother had ridden 6 miles to bring her because she'd heard there was a woman teaching reading, and she wanted her daughter to have what she'd never had. Eleanor taught them at the kitchen table because the parlor wasn't ready yet. She taught them the alphabet. She taught them to write their names. She taught them that the word Wyoming had 7 letters, and that 7 was a prime number, and that prime numbers were like certain people. They stood alone, but they were the foundation of everything. The second week, 4 more children came. The third week, 9. By the 4th week, Eleanor was teaching 12 children in a parlor that Nate, directing from his bed, unable to stand but unwilling to be useless, had instructed Thomas to outfit with benches made from the leftover cedar posts and a makeshift blackboard cut from the side of the old hay barn, painted with 3 coats of the darkest stain they could find. Adelaide's books arrived on a Tuesday. 2 crates, delivered by a freight wagon, with a note pinned to the top in Adelaide's sharp, upright handwriting. "You didn't ask for charity, so I'm not giving any. These are a loan. You teach those children to read, and we'll call it even. And eat something. You're too thin. A. Mercer." Eleanor held the note for a long time. Then she unpacked the books and put them on the shelf Nate had asked Thomas to build. And when she stood back and looked at that shelf, 23 books in a parlor in Wyoming Territory, she felt the same thing she'd felt looking at the finished fence. Pride. Hard-won, dirt under the fingernails, blood in the boots, pride. The children changed things. Not just the ranch, the valley. Mothers who had never spoken to Eleanor rode in to pick up their children and stayed for coffee. They talked about gardens, about canning, about the price of flour, and the best way to treat croup, and the particular loneliness of being a woman on the frontier where your nearest neighbor is an hour's ride, and your husband is gone from dawn till dark, and the silence can eat you alive if you let it. Eleanor listened. She listened the way Adelaide had listened to her, not with pity, but with recognition. One afternoon, a woman named Clara Dawkins rode in from the west with her 3 children, and a black eye she didn't explain, and Eleanor didn't ask about. Clara sat in the kitchen while her children learned their letters, and she drank coffee and stared at the wall. And when it was time to go, she looked at Eleanor and said, "Can I come back tomorrow, even without the children?" "You can come back any time," Eleanor said. Clara came back, every day. She never talked about the eye, or the ones that followed. But she came back, and eventually she started helping in the school. Sharpening pencils, cutting paper, washing the blackboard. Eleanor gave her jobs because she understood that a woman who is useful is a woman who can hold on to herself. And sometimes that's the only thing standing between a person and the dark. Harper came on a Saturday. Eleanor was alone. Nate was sleeping, Thomas was out checking the herd, and the children were home for the weekend. She was sitting on the porch writing lesson plans when she heard the horse. Harper rode up slow. He dismounted slower. He walked to the bottom of the porch steps and stood there with his hat in his hands. And Eleanor saw something she had never expected to see on that granite face. Uncertainty. "Mrs. Cole," he said. "Mr. Harper." "My granddaughter, Abigail. She's been talking about your school." "Abigail's not one of my students." "I know. She heard about it from the Wilkins boy. She won't stop asking to come." Harper turned his hat in his hands. "She's 7. She can't read. Her mother died 2 years ago, and her father works my ranch, and there's nobody—" He stopped. The words were costing him. Every one of them extracted like a rotten tooth. "There's nobody to teach her." "You could send her," Eleanor said. "To you?" "To my school, yes." Harper looked at the porch, at the house, at the ranch that he had dismissed as a failing operation run by a broken man and his Eastern mail-order bride. "I said some things," he said, "about you, about your marriage, about whether you belonged here." "I know what you said. I was wrong. 2 words, from a man who had probably never said them in 70 years. "Send Abigail on Monday," Eleanor said. "School starts at 8. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing. School's free." "I don't take charity." "It's not charity, Mr. Harper. It's an investment. In your granddaughter. In this valley. In the idea that every child in Wyoming Territory deserves to read and write and count, regardless of who their grandmother married or where their mother came from." Harper stared at her for a long time. Then he put his hat back on. "Monday," he said. "Monday." He mounted his horse. He rode halfway down the road. Then he stopped and turned back. "Mrs. Cole, Mr. Harper, that fence you built, the south one, I rode past it yesterday." "And?" "It's a good fence." He rode away. Eleanor sat on the porch and looked at the road, and felt something shift in the ground beneath her. Not dramatic, not sudden, but deep. The way tectonic plates move, the way continents drift, the slow, enormous rearrangement of a world that is making room for something new. When Nate woke, she told him. "Harper said that?" he asked. He was sitting up now. 6 weeks had passed, and the doctor had cleared him to put weight on the leg with a crutch. He was thinner, grayer at the temples, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been since she'd met him. "Harper said that." "About the fence?" "About the fence." Nate was quiet. Then he laughed. A real laugh, the first Eleanor had heard from him. It was rough and rusty, like a machine that hadn't been used in years, but it was real, and it was his, and it filled the kitchen like sunlight fills a room when you pull back the curtains. "What?" Eleanor asked. "I've been ranching next to that man for 8 years. He's never once said a kind word about anything I've built." "Well, he said it about something we built." Nate looked at her. The laughter faded, but what replaced it was something better. A steadiness, a warmth, the quiet recognition of a man looking at his life and realizing, maybe for the first time, that it was becoming something worth living. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes?" "I'd like to introduce you to the valley, properly, the way I should have from the beginning." "What does that mean?" "There's a gathering at the Miller's place next Saturday. Every ranch family in the valley comes. It's tradition, end of summer, before the work of fall starts." He paused. "I'd like to take you, and I'd like to introduce you as my wife. Not as my mail-order bride, not as the woman from Philadelphia, as my wife, as the woman who runs this ranch beside me." Eleanor looked at him. She thought about the platform, the whispers, the ticket agent who didn't look up, the boy who called her the mail-order lady. "Will you say that?" she asked. "In front of everyone?" "I'll say more than that." "What will you say?" Nate reached across the table. He put his hand on hers. It was the first time he had initiated contact. Every other time, she had reached first. She had held on. This time, it was him. His hand was rough and warm, and it did not tremble. "I'll say this ranch is ours," he said. "Not mine. Ours. I'll say you built the fence and crossed the river and pulled me off that creek bank. I'll say you started a school in our parlor and taught 12 children to read. I'll say you rode into a storm for me." His voice dropped low. "And I'll say I was 5 days late and you were still there. And that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that." Eleanor looked at his hand on hers. She turned her palm up and laced her fingers through his. Slowly, deliberately, the way you do something for the first time when you want to remember every part of it. "Saturday," she said. "Saturday." She squeezed his hand once. Then she let go and stood up and cleared the table, because there was work to be done, and the morning was coming, and 32 cattle needed feeding, and 12 students were arriving at 8, and the parlor floor still creaked in the corner, and the window still needed sealing before the cold came. But for the first time since she'd stepped off that train in Missouri, Eleanor Cole was not surviving. She was building. Saturday came the way important days do, too fast and too slow at the same time. Eleanor stood in front of the small mirror in her room and tried to make herself presentable. Her traveling dress was beyond saving. She'd washed it 4 times, and it still carried the ghost of creek mud and storm water. But Adelaide had sent something with the books that Eleanor hadn't noticed at first. A dress, folded at the bottom of the second crate, wrapped in brown paper with a note that said simply, "It was mine. It fits better on a woman who's earned it." It was blue. Simple cotton, nothing fine. But it was clean, and it was whole. And when Eleanor put it on, she felt something she hadn't felt since Philadelphia. Like a woman. Not a ranch hand. Not a mail-order bride. Not a survivor. A woman. She came out of the room. Nate was standing in the kitchen, leaning on the crutch Thomas had carved from an oak branch. He'd shaved. His hair was combed. He was wearing a clean shirt that Eleanor hadn't seen before. And she realized he must have asked Thomas to bring it from town. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Nate cleared his throat. "You look—" He stopped, started again. "Adelaide's dress." "Yes." "It suits you." "Thank you." Another silence. The kind that sits between two people who are seeing each other clearly for the first time and don't quite know what to do with what they see. "We should go," Eleanor said. "Thomas has the wagon ready." "Eleanor." "Yes?" "Before we go, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you weeks ago." Her stomach dropped. She kept her face still. "All right." Nate set the crutch against the table. He stood on his own, unsteady, favoring the bad leg, but standing. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I got a letter," he said. "3 weeks ago, while you were teaching. Thomas brought it from town and I didn't know how to tell you." "A letter? From whom?" "From your brother." Eleanor went completely still. The air left the room. Her brother, David. The brother she hadn't spoken to in 2 years. The brother who had told her she was a fool for answering a stranger's advertisement. The brother who had said, the last time she saw him, "You're throwing your life away on a fantasy, Ellie. Don't come crying to me when it falls apart." "What does it say?" she whispered. "He wants to know if you're alive." He wrote to the boarding house in Missouri. Adelaide forwarded it here. Nate held out the letter. "He says your mother is sick. He says she's been asking for you." Eleanor took the letter. Her hands did not shake. She unfolded it and read it standing in the kitchen in Adelaide's blue dress, with the sound of Thomas hitching the horses outside and the weight of every choice she'd ever made pressing down on her shoulders like snow. David's handwriting was the same. Sharp, impatient, the penmanship of a man who considers writing a waste of time better spent doing. The letter was short. "Ellie, I don't know if you're alive or dead. Mother is ill. Consumption. The doctor gives her until winter. She asks for you every day. I know what I said when you left. I was angry. I was wrong. If you can come home, come. If you can't, write. She deserves to hear your voice, even on paper. Your brother, David." Eleanor read it twice. She folded it. She put it in the pocket of Adelaide's dress. "How long have you had this?" she said. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Her voice was flat. Not angry. Worse than angry. Controlled. "You've known for 3 weeks that my mother is dying, and you didn't tell me. I was afraid." "Of what?" "That you'd leave." The words fell between them like a stone into still water. Eleanor looked at him. This man she had married. This man she had pulled from a creek bank. This man whose hand she had held across a kitchen table. And she saw the fear in him. Not the war fear. Not the storm fear. The oldest fear of all. The fear of being left. "You thought I'd leave?" she said. "Your mother's dying, Eleanor. Your brother's asking you to come home. And I'm standing here with a broken leg and a leaking roof and $42 and nothing that compares to your family." "You are my family." The words came out before she could measure them. They came out raw and unplanned and absolutely true. And they hit Nate Cole like a physical blow. She saw his shoulders buckle. She saw his eyes fill. She saw the crutch slip and his hand grab the table edge. And she didn't know if it was the leg or the words that had taken him off balance. "I am not leaving," Eleanor said. "I am going to write to my brother today. I am going to tell my mother that I am alive and that I love her and that I am building a life she would be proud of. And if she is well enough to travel in the spring, she can come here. And if she's not—" Eleanor's voice cracked. She let it. She let the crack show because she was tired of sealing herself shut, tired of being the strong one, tired of holding the walls up with nothing but willpower and pride. "If she's not, then I will carry that grief the same way I've carried everything else, with both hands, on my feet, in this house." Nate reached for her. Not her hand. Her. He pulled her against his chest, one arm around her shoulders, the crutch clattering to the floor, his weight shifting onto the bad leg. And she could feel the pain that cost him, but he didn't let go. He held on. Eleanor pressed her forehead against his collarbone and breathed. This was the first time he had held her. 7 weeks of marriage. 7 weeks of separate rooms and careful distance, and the slow, painstaking construction of trust, built brick by brick, word by word, fence post by fence post. And now his arms were around her, and her face was against his shirt, and she could hear his heartbeat. Fast, frightened, alive. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "I know. I should have told you." "Yes. I was scared. I know that too." She pulled back. She wiped her eyes. She had cried, finally, for the first time since Missouri. And she didn't feel weaker for it. She felt lighter, as if the tears had been ballast she no longer needed. "We're going to the Millers," she said. "We're going to stand in front of every family in this valley, and you're going to say what you said you'd say. And then we're going to come home, and I'm going to write to my brother and my mother. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to open that school and teach those children to read. That's the plan, mate. That's my plan. Are you with me?" "I'm with you." "Then pick up your crutch. We're late." The Millers' gathering was exactly what Eleanor had expected, and nothing like it. Every ranch family in the valley was there. 30, 40 people, maybe more. Men who looked like the land had carved them. Women who looked like they'd been carrying the weight of it since birth. Children running barefoot through the yard, chasing dogs and each other. And every single one of them turned to look when Nate's wagon pulled up. Eleanor felt the eyes. She felt the whispers starting. The same whispers she'd felt on the platform in Missouri. The same current of judgment and curiosity and cruelty disguised as interest. Thomas jumped down first. He offered his hand to Eleanor. She took it. She climbed down. She stood straight. Nate came after, slow on the crutch, his jaw tight with the effort of not showing pain. He stood beside her. The crowd watched. A woman Eleanor didn't know leaned to another and said something behind her hand. A man near the fence crossed his arms. Harper was there, standing apart from the others, his hawk eyes fixed on Eleanor with an expression she couldn't read. And then, Guthrie. Eleanor saw him before he saw her. He was standing near the water trough, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his tobacco-stained teeth visible in a grin that made her skin crawl. He was talking to 2 men she didn't know, and she caught the words mail order and opportunist and land grab before his eyes found hers and the grin widened. "Well," Guthrie said, loud enough for everyone, "there she is, The Philadelphia school teacher who came west to play rancher. How's that working out for you, sweetheart?" The yard went quiet. The children stopped running. The dog stopped chasing. Every eye shifted between Guthrie and Eleanor like spectators at a boxing match, waiting for the first blow. Eleanor felt Nate stiffen beside her. She felt his hand move toward Guthrie, not to strike, but to step forward, to put himself between her and the man with the stained teeth and the loud mouth. She put her hand on his arm. "Don't," she said quietly. "Eleanor, I know what he is." She squeezed his arm once, then she let go. She stepped forward. She walked across the yard toward Guthrie with the same steady stride she'd used walking into Harper's porch. The same stride she'd used crossing the creek. The same stride that had carried her off a train platform in Missouri when the world had decided she was finished. She stopped 3 feet from Guthrie, close enough to see the red veins in his eyes, and the crumbs in his beard, and the small, mean pleasure he took in humiliating women who couldn't fight back. "Mr. Guthrie," she said, "we met at Mrs. Mercer's boarding house in Missouri. I served you breakfast. You asked me if I was the bride nobody came for." Guthrie's grin flickered. He hadn't expected her to come to him. He'd expected her to cower, to let her husband handle it, to do what women were supposed to do in his version of the world. Stand behind a man and take what was given. "I remember," he said. "You had quite a mouth on you." "I still do." Eleanor's voice carried across the yard, not because she was shouting, because the yard was silent, and truth has a way of carrying farther than noise. "You've been telling people I came here for land, that I'm an opportunist, that I let my husband get hurt so I could take his ranch." Guthrie shifted. The grin was gone now. "I never said that. Thomas Reed heard you, in Cedar Falls, 3 weeks ago. You told anyone who'd listen." "I said what I saw. A woman with no money and no prospects who married a stranger for property. Ain't the first time it's happened on the frontier." "You're right, it's not. But that's not what happened here." Eleanor turned. She faced the crowd. She looked at the mothers she'd served coffee to, the children she'd taught to spell their names. Clara Dawkins, standing in the back with her children, her eye healed, but the fear still there. Harper, motionless by the fence. The Miller family. The Wilkins boy, Samuel, who could write his name for the first time in his life because of the school in her parlor. "My name is Eleanor Cole," she said. "I came to Wyoming Territory as a mail-order bride. I waited 3 days on a platform in Missouri for a man who didn't come. And I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not ashamed of anything I've done since. I've dug post holes. I've driven cattle. I've crossed a river in a wagon I'd never driven before. I pulled my husband off a creek bank in a storm and splinted his broken leg with a broom handle." Her voice didn't waver. "And I opened a school in my parlor because every child in this valley deserves to read, and nobody else was going to teach them." She turned back to Guthrie. "I didn't come here for land, Mr. Guthrie. I came here for a life. The same reason every woman on this frontier came. The same reason your mother came, and your grandmother, and every woman who ever packed a trunk and got on a train pointed west. We didn't come because it was easy. We came because we were brave enough to try. And if that makes me an opportunist in your eyes, then I will wear that word like a badge. Because the only people who sneer at opportunity are the ones too cowardly to reach for it." The yard was silent. Then Clara Dawkins started clapping. One person. Slow claps. The sound of a woman who had been given nothing but silence for years and was finally making noise. Then the Wilkins mother. Then Mrs. Miller. Then Samuel, the 8-year-old boy who could write his name, who clapped with his whole body, the way children do when they believe what they're hearing. The applause spread. Not everyone joined. Guthrie didn't, and a few of his allies stood with their arms crossed and their jaws tight. But most of them did. Most of them clapped for a woman in a borrowed blue dress who had stood in front of them and told the truth without apology. Guthrie set his whiskey down. He looked around at the faces that were no longer on his side. He looked at Eleanor one more time, and what he saw there was not anger or triumph or satisfaction. It was indifference. The complete, devastating indifference of a woman who has decided a man is not worth her fury. He left. He walked to his horse, mounted up, and rode away without a word. Nobody watched him go. Then Nate stepped forward. He limped into the center of the yard on his crutch, and Eleanor saw what it cost him. Not just the pain in his leg, but the pain of a man who had spent years hiding, years staying quiet, years letting his isolation speak for him, because speaking for himself was too much like the vulnerability that got men killed. "Most of you know me," he said. His voice was rough, unpolished. The voice of a man who talked to cattle more than people. "You know I keep to myself. You know I came back from the war and bought my land and didn't ask for much. Some of you probably thought I'd die alone out there. And I'll be honest, I thought so too." He looked at Eleanor. "I wrote to this woman because I was lonely, and I was scared, and I was running out of reasons to get up in the morning. And when she wrote back, I thought, she's too good. She's too smart. She'll come out here and see who I really am, and she'll leave. So I was late. I was 5 days late because I was a coward." His voice cracked. He let it. "She waited. She waited 3 days. And when I showed up with a dead flower and a lie about a flood, she didn't run to me, and she didn't forgive me. She looked me in the eye, and she told me her terms. She told me what she expected. And everything she's done since then, every fence post, every cattle drive, every child she's taught, she did it on her terms, not mine." He turned to the crowd. "This ranch is ours, not mine. It hasn't been mine since the day she swept my kitchen floor. And if anyone in this valley has a problem with that, with her, with our marriage, with who she is, or where she came from, you can take it up with me. But I promise you, she'll handle it better than I will." Laughter. Real laughter. The warm, rolling kind that breaks tension and rebuilds it into something livable. Harper stepped forward. The old man moved through the crowd with the slow authority of someone who has earned the right to be listened to. He stopped in front of Eleanor. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "my granddaughter Abigail read me a letter yesterday. First letter she's ever written. It said—" He paused. The hawk eyes glistened. "It said, 'Dear Grandpa, I love you. Your friend, Abigail.'" He cleared his throat. 6 words. Took her all afternoon. It was the finest letter I've ever received. He tipped his hat to Eleanor. Full and proper, the way men tip their hats when they mean it. "Thank you," he said, "for teaching her." Eleanor nodded. She didn't trust her voice. Harper turned to the crowd. "Anybody else got something to say about this woman?" Nobody did. "Good," Harper said. "Now somebody pour me a drink. I'm too old to be making speeches." The gathering continued. People ate, people talked, children played. And Eleanor stood beside Nate and received what she had never received on that platform in Missouri. Welcome. Not the loud, performative kind. The quiet kind. A handshake here, a nod there. A woman pressing a jar of preserves into her hands and saying, "For the school." A man telling mate, "You did good, Cole." As the sun dropped, Thomas found Eleanor alone by the wagon. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I just survived something." "You did. You survived Guthrie. That man's had this valley scared for years." "He's a bully. Bullies are easy. You just have to stand still and let them run out of wind." Thomas leaned against the wagon. "Can I tell you something, Eleanor?" "You're going to, whether I say yes or not." He grinned. Then the grin faded. "When Nate first told me he'd sent for a mail-order bride, I thought he'd lost his mind. I thought, this man can't take care of himself. How's he going to take care of a wife? And when he didn't show up to get you, I thought, well, that's that. She'll go home, and he'll go back to being alone, and everything will stay the way it was. And now? Now I think he's the luckiest man in Wyoming territory. And I think you're the bravest woman I've ever met. And I think—" He stopped. He pulled his hat off and held it against his chest, the same gesture he'd made the night of the storm. "I think my mother would have liked you. She was like you, strong, stubborn, wouldn't take no for an answer." "What happened to her?" "Died when I was 12. Fever. My daddy never recovered. He drank himself to death inside 2 years." Thomas put his hat back on. "That's why I work for Nate. He's the closest thing I've got to family, and now you're the closest thing I've got to—" He shrugged. "Well, to what I lost." Eleanor put her hand on his arm. "You haven't lost us, Thomas. You're stuck with us." "Yes, ma'am." He tipped his hat. "I reckon I am." They rode home in the dark. Nate drove. Eleanor sat beside him. Thomas rode alongside on his horse, whistling something tuneless and happy. When they reached the ranch, Thomas said good night and rode to the bunkhouse. Eleanor helped Nate down from the wagon. He leaned on the crutch, but he also leaned on her, just slightly, just enough that she could feel his weight against her shoulder, the warmth of him, the solidity. They stood in the yard. The night was clear. The stars were so thick they looked like someone had spilled flour across a dark table. "Eleanor," Nate said. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to let me finish." "All right." "When I wrote that first letter, the advertisement, the one you answered, I said I was looking for a partner, and I meant it, but I didn't know what it meant. I thought a partner was someone who helped with the work, someone to split the load. And you are that. God knows you are." He turned to face her. "But you're more than that. You're the reason this ranch is alive. You're the reason those children can read. You're the reason Harper tipped his hat and Clara Dawkins has somewhere to go, and Thomas smiles again." He paused. "You're the reason I'm standing here instead of lying at the bottom of Heart's Creek." "Nate, let me finish." He took a breath. "I was 5 days late, and I will regret those 5 days for the rest of my life. Not because they were wrong, they were, but because they were 5 days I could have had with you. 5 days of watching you sweep my kitchen and argue with my neighbors and teach children and drive wagons and be the most terrifying, extraordinary person I have ever known." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I love you, Eleanor. I don't say that to hold you. I say it because it's true, and you deserve to hear it. And a man who can admit cowardice can sure as hell admit love." The yard was quiet. The stars burned. The cattle shifted in the pen. Somewhere, an owl called. Eleanor looked at this man, this broken, honest, terrified, brave man who had written her 17 letters and been 5 days late, and admitted it to the whole valley, and given her his parlor for a school, and held her in his kitchen, and waited 7 weeks to say what he could have said on day 1. "Nate Cole," she said, I have been waiting to hear that for a very long time." "How long?" "Since about the 14th letter." He laughed, that rough, rusty sound she'd heard once before, but warmer now. Fuller. The sound of a man coming back to life. "Can I—" he started. "Yes." He kissed her. In the yard, under the stars, leaning on a crutch with a leg that wasn't fully healed and a heart that was healing faster. It wasn't a perfect kiss. His lip caught on hers. His hat fell off. The crutch slipped, and he grabbed her shoulder to keep from falling, and she laughed against his mouth, and he laughed against hers, and it was clumsy and graceless and absolutely, perfectly real. When they pulled apart, Eleanor bent down and picked up his hat. She put it on his head. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make coffee." "It's the middle of the night." "I know. Come inside anyway." He came inside. She made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd eaten their first meal, where she demanded his honesty, where he'd gripped the leg during the storm, where the doctor had set his bone. "I'm going to write to my mother tonight," Eleanor said. "I know." "And to David." "What will you tell them?" Eleanor wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. Her hands, still calloused, still scarred, still bearing the evidence of everything she'd built, but steady now, sure. "I'll tell them I'm home," she said. "I'll tell my mother that her daughter married a man who was 5 days late and worth the wait. I'll tell David that I didn't throw my life away. I built one. And I'll tell them both that there's a ranch in Wyoming territory, with a parlor full of books, and a fence that holds, and a creek that floods in summer but quiets down by fall. And if they ever want to see it, the door is open." "And the school?" "The school stays. It grows. I want a real building by spring, with a proper roof and proper desks and a bell. I want every child in this valley to hear that bell and know that somebody believes they're worth teaching. That'll cost money we don't have. Then we'll earn it, or we'll borrow it, or I'll stand in front of Harper's porch and negotiate until he builds it himself. One way or another, that school gets built." Nate looked at her across the table. The lamplight caught the lines of his face, the scar, the weathering, the new lines that had come from pain, and the older ones that had come from loneliness. But his eyes were clear. His hands were still. The tremor that had lived in them since Chickamauga was quiet tonight, as if even the war ghosts knew that something had shifted, something had settled, something had finally come to rest. "Eleanor," he said. "What?" "I'm glad you waited." She smiled, the first full, unguarded smile she had given anyone since the day she'd stepped onto that train in Philadelphia, with a trunk full of letters and a chest full of hope. "I'm glad you came," she said. She wrote the letters that night, both of them. She sat at the kitchen table after Nate had gone to bed, to his bed, alone, because some things don't change in one night, and the separate rooms were still part of their agreement, and Eleanor was a woman who honored her agreements, even when the terms were becoming harder to keep. She wrote to her mother first. She told her about the ranch, the school, the children, the fence. She told her about Adelaide and Thomas and Harper, and a yellow rose that had been wilted when it arrived, but might yet grow if she planted it right. She did not tell her about the creek, or the storm, or the broken leg. Some truths are better delivered in person. She wrote to David last. She kept it short. "David, I'm alive. I'm married. I'm well. You were wrong about me, and I forgive you for it. Come see for yourself. Ellie." She sealed both letters. She set them on the table. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the land. Her land. Their land. the land she had earned with blistered hands and bloody boots, and a will that wouldn't break. She thought about the platform, the bench, the trunk, the whispers, the 3 days of waiting that had felt like 3 lifetimes. She thought about what she would tell her students on Monday morning when they filed into the parlor and sat on their cedar post benches and looked at her with those wide, hungry eyes that children have when they know someone is about to give them something valuable. She would tell them this: that waiting is not weakness, that choosing is not gambling, that a woman who picks up her trunk and walks toward the unknown is not foolish. She is the bravest thing this frontier has ever produced. And she would tell them that love is not a feeling. Love is a verb. Love is showing up. Love is 5 days late with a wilted rose and an honest admission of fear. Love is separate rooms and equal terms, and hands that hold without grabbing. Love is a fence built together, and a school born from nothing, and a ride through a storm to pull someone back from the edge. Love is still being there when every reason says go. Eleanor closed the window. She turned down the lamp. She walked down the hall to her room, past Nate's door, where she could hear him breathing, steady and deep. No nightmares tonight. She stopped at his door. She pressed her palm against the wood. She held it there for a moment, just a moment, feeling the warmth of the house he'd built and the life they were building inside it. "Good night, Nate," she whispered. From inside the room, barely audible. "Good night, Eleanor." She smiled. She went to her room. She lay down in the bed that had become hers. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor Cole did not dream of somewhere else. She dreamed of exactly where she was. She had waited 3 days on a platform in Missouri. But what she built in Wyoming, with her own hands, on her own terms, beside a man who learned to show up, was worth every minute of the wait.